A city survived an energy storm that should have shattered its dome, because one human stepped into an alien's chaos and didn't flinch. They say no one can anchor a living storm, yet somehow he did. Where would you stand in a universe that expects you to run? Tell me where you're watching from, subscribe to support the channel's growth, and let's begin. The crystal sang wrong. Lyrae stood alone in the northern clearing, her silver eyes flickering between calm gray and anxious amber as she extended her hands toward the hovering sphere of light. The Godlight should have responded to her bloodline, should have bent to her will like it did for every other Etheriana of noble descent. Instead, it trembled, pulsed erratically, and then darted away as if her very presence burned it. She lowered her hands slowly, feeling the familiar weight of shame settle over her shoulders like a cloak made of lead. This was her life. This had always been her life. From the tree line she could sense eyes watching. Not the judging stares of her own people, those she had learned to avoid, but something different. Curious, patient. She turned to find the human standing there, partially hidden behind one of the crystalline trees, a datapad in his hands, and an expression that looked less like pity and more like genuine interest. "Sorry," he said, stepping forward with an awkward half-wave. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just cataloging the resonance patterns, and I noticed the fluctuation was actually kind of beautiful. Beautiful. No one had ever called her failures beautiful." "Your people see me as a defect," Lyrae said, her voice sharper than she intended. "You should too." The human, Elias Ward, according to the patch on his worn research jacket, tilted his head slightly. "I don't really know your people well enough to have opinions about defects. I barely know my own people well enough for that." He gestured to the godlight that had fled from her. "Does it always do that?" "Yes." "Does it hurt you?" The question caught her off guard. In 20 cycles of life, no one had ever asked if it hurt. They asked what was wrong with her. They asked why she could not control it. They asked how she could bear the shame of her bloodline. No one asked if it hurt. "No," she admitted quietly. "It just leaves." Elias nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Maybe it's scared." "The Godlights do not feel fear. They are sacred energy, pure and ancient." "Everything feels something," Elias said with a small shrug. "Even energy, especially energy." He glanced at his datapad, then back at her. "I'm Elias, by the way. I've been here about 8 months. Still trying to figure out which crystals are rude and which ones are just shy." Despite herself, despite the years of practiced isolation, Lyrae felt the corner of her mouth twitch. "Crystals are not rude." "You haven't met the one near my station. Definitely rude. Plays the same 3 notes over and over at 0300 hours. Lyrae found herself almost smiling before she remembered herself. She pulled her hood up, preparing to leave, to return to her small dwelling on the outskirts where she belonged. "Wait," Elias called. "I didn't catch your name." She hesitated. Giving her name meant conversation. Conversation meant connection. Connection meant inevitable disappointment when he learned what she was. "Lyrae?" she finally said. "Nice to meet you, Lyrae." The sky began to darken, not with night but with something else. Lyrae felt it before she saw it, the familiar tightening in her chest that meant her gift was reacting to something she could not control. Storm clouds of pure light began gathering overhead, crackling with energy that made her skin prickle. She had to leave, had to get away before it happened again. But her legs would not move, and the world tilted sideways as the storm inside her rose to meet the storm above. The last thing she heard before darkness took her was Elias shouting her name. Lyrae woke to the smell of something bitter and earthy, nothing like the crystalline cleanness of Etherian's air. Her eyes opened slowly to find herself on a narrow cot in what appeared to be a human dwelling. The walls were covered in star charts and geological surveys, and in the corner, a small heating unit hummed softly. Elias sat at a cluttered desk, his back to her, muttering something about persistent frequency anomalies. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Her head spun, and her hands trembled with the after-effects of the storm. Elias turned at the sound of her movement, his expression shifting from concentration to something like relief. "Hey, take it easy," he said, crossing the small space in 3 strides. He offered her a chipped mug. "It's tea. Earth tea. Not local. Fair warning, it tastes like someone's opinion of what plants should taste like, but it helps with the shakes." Lyrae stared at the mug, then at him. "You carried me here." "Yeah, well, you were unconscious in the middle of a light storm. Seemed like the thing to do." He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "I probably should have called your people, but I figured you'd wake up before I figured out how to navigate Etherian emergency protocols. My translation software is still learning." She took the mug, mostly because her hands needed something to hold. The tea was as strange as he had promised, but the warmth helped. "Why did you not leave me there?" Elias blinked at her as if she had just asked why water was wet. "Because you needed help?" "I am used to managing alone." "Yeah, I got that impression." He pulled up a chair, sitting backwards on it like gravity was a suggestion rather than a rule. "You want to talk about what happened, or would you prefer awkward silence? I'm good at both." The question was so absurd, so casually offered, that Lyrae found herself answering honestly. "I have no control over my gift. When the energy is strong, when I am emotional, it reacts. Sometimes it is small. Sometimes it is that." That being the light storm that looked like the sky was having an existential crisis? "Yes." Elias nodded thoughtfully. "Does it hurt when it happens?" There it was again, that question. "It frightens me," she admitted, the words falling out before she could stop them. "I am afraid of my own gift. Every Etheriana is born to command the Godlights, to shape them and guide them. I cannot even keep them near me. I am a failure of my bloodline." She expected pity. She expected the careful distance her own people maintained. What she did not expect was for Elias to lean forward, his expression thoughtful rather than sympathetic. "Fear isn't weakness," he said quietly. "It's honesty. Takes more guts to admit you're scared than to pretend you're not." Lyrae stared at him. This strange human with his mismatched clothing, and his easy way of talking about things that should have been shameful. "Why did you come to Etherian?" she asked. "Humans rarely visit. We are not welcoming." Elias laughed, but there was something hollow in it. "I came because I was good at being where nobody noticed me. 8 months, and I think you're the first person who's actually had a conversation with me that wasn't about research permits." Understanding struck her like a bell. 2 invisible people, orbiting the edges of their worlds. A small godlight, no larger than her fist, drifted through the partially open window. It should have ignored the human dwelling entirely, but instead it floated toward Elias, hovering near his shoulder. He did not move, did not speak, but his voice when he said, "Hello, little one," was so gentle that Lyrae felt something in her chest tighten. The godlight pulsed once, twice, then drifted to settle near the window as if standing guard. "There is a place I dream of going," Lyrae whispered, not sure why she was telling him. "But I never will." 2 days passed before Lyrae returned to the research station. She told herself it was to return the mug. She told herself it was simple courtesy. She did not examine too closely why she had spent an hour selecting which cloak to wear. Elias was outside, attempting to recalibrate some equipment that looked like it had seen better decades. He glanced up as she approached, and his face split into an easy smile that made her silver eyes flicker to a warmer bronze. "Hey! You're up and about. That's good. I was starting to worry my tea had poisoned you." "Your tea was adequate," Lyrae said, which was the closest she had come to a compliment in years. "High praise. I'll tell the leaves." He set down his tools. "So what's this place you dream of going?" The directness of it nearly made her retreat. But something about the way he asked, like her dreams were normal things that deserved air and light, made her answer. The forbidden temple of Violoth, where the Godlights are born, where they first touch our world. Only those deemed worthy may enter. I am not worthy. Says who? Says everyone. Says the elders. Says the Godlights themselves, which flee from me. Elias wiped his hands on his pants, leaving streaks of dust. What if they're not fleeing? What if they're just confused? Energy responds to emotion, right? Maybe they feel what you feel, and they don't know what to do with it. It was such a human way of thinking, assigning feelings and uncertainty to something sacred and absolute. It should have been laughable. It was not laughable. If I enter the temple, Lyrae said slowly, I will be imprisoned. It is forbidden for the unworthy, and I am, by all measures, unworthy. And if you don't enter, then I will never know if I can be more than this. Elias was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant as if calculating something. Then he looked at her with an expression so earnest, it hurt. What if I went with you? Lyrae laughed. She could not help it. The sound was sharp and bitter. You are human. No outsider has ever entered the Forbidden Temple. They would imprison you simply for approaching. So we'd both be taking a risk. Why would you do something so foolish? Because nobody ever wanted to be with me at my worst, Elias said simply. And if your worst is being scared of a gift you can't control, then that's still more honest than most people offer. The words hit her like a physical thing. Her silver eyes shifted through 3 colors before settling on a soft violet, the shade of surprise and something dangerously close to hope. She should have said no. She should have walked away, returned to her isolation, accepted her place in the hierarchy. Instead, she found herself nodding. They planned in whispers over the next week. The temple was guarded, but the guards followed patterns. There was a 2-hour window before dawn when patrols shifted. Elias provided a map he had made of the terrain, detailed enough that Lyrae asked how many rules he had broken to create it. Research requires thoroughness, he said with a grin that suggested he knew exactly how many rules. The night before they were to leave, Elias sat at his desk, writing something on actual paper, an Earth custom. Lyrae watched from the doorway, not quite entering. What are you writing? A letter I'll never send, he admitted, to people I used to know, telling them that maybe I finally matter to someone. Or she wanted to tell him he mattered. She wanted to tell him that for the first time in her life, she felt less alone. But the words stuck in her throat, so instead she pulled out a small crystal she had carved, a rough but recognizable figure of a human. She hid it in her cloak before he could see. Dawn came too quickly and not quickly enough. They moved through the crystalline forest of Armora in silence, their breath misting in the cold air. The trees sang around them, harmonies that should have been warning but sounded almost like encouragement. The Forbidden Temple rose before them, ancient and impossible, its walls seeming to exist in more dimensions than 3. Statues of the first Etherianas lined the entrance, their eyes made of pure godlight, watching, always watching. Elias touched her hand briefly. You ready? No. Yes. Maybe. I am with you, Lyrae said. So yes. They stepped forward together, and the eyes of the statues blazed bright. The interior of the Forbidden Temple defied understanding. Walls curved in directions that should not exist, and godlights flowed through the air like rivers of conscious light, weaving patterns that hurt to look at directly. The temperature was perfect, the silence was complete, and Lyrae felt more terrified than she had ever been in her life. The temple knew her. She could feel it, the way it touched her bloodline, acknowledged her heritage. The godlights turned toward her, recognizing the ancient markers in her DNA, and then they moved away. Not fleeing exactly, but maintaining a careful distance, as if she carried some invisible disease they dared not catch. The familiar shame rose in her throat, threatening to choke her. Elias, beside her, was completely ignored. The godlights passed around him as if he were furniture, unremarkable and beneath notice. He should have been relieved. Instead, he reached out carefully and touched one of the crystalline walls with something like reverence in his expression. A single godlight paused. It drifted closer to him, curious, tilting at an angle that suggested a head cocked in question. "Sorry," Elias whispered to it. "I've never seen anything like this. It's beautiful." The godlight pulsed once, a soft blue, then continued on its path. But Leary had seen it. That moment of acknowledgement. That pause. "Come on," she said, her voice barely audible. "The central platform is deeper in." They moved through chambers that seemed to breathe, past fountains of solid light and archives of crystallized memory. Twice, Elias stumbled over architecture that existed at ankle height in one moment and knee height the next. The second time, he apologized to a statue that was definitely not sentient. Probably not sentient. "Do you think they accept verbal apologies, or do I need to fill out a form?" he asked, and despite everything, despite her fear, Larry felt laughter bubble up. She crushed it down quickly, but not before Elias grinned at her. The central platform appeared suddenly, as if the temple had decided they were ready for it. It was a circle of crystal suspended over nothing, surrounded by hundreds of godlights that orbited like planets around a star. This was where the energy was strongest, where Etherianas came to prove their worth, to demonstrate their control. Lyrae had dreamed of this moment for years. Now that she was here, she wanted nothing more than to run. "I will try," she said, more to herself than to Elias. "I need to try." "I'll be right here," he promised. She stepped onto the platform alone. The godlights responded immediately, surging toward her, recognizing the call of bloodline. But as they drew close, her gift activated involuntarily, her own energy reaching out in a way she could not control, wild and desperate and afraid. The godlights recoiled. The platform trembled. Lyrae's vision blurred as memory overlaid reality. She was 7 again, in the learning circle, trying so hard to do what came naturally to others. The energy had lashed out, striking another child, burning them. The screams, the way everyone looked at her after. Monster, defective, dangerous. Her knees hit the crystal floor. The platform was shaking now, energy building in a way that would either break her or break the temple. She could feel it spiraling, the same way it always did, toward disaster. Warm hands settled on her shoulders. "Hey," Elias said, his voice impossibly calm in the chaos. "I'm here." "I've got you. Just breathe." "I cannot," she gasped. "I cannot stop it." "Then don't stop it. Just breathe through it. I'm not going anywhere." And then he did something no one had ever done. He did not try to fix her. He did not try to control the energy. He simply stayed, his presence a steady point in the storm, his hands warm and real and there. "Kalma," he whispered, switching to a word from his own language without realizing. "I'm here." The godlights stopped. Every single one. The temple went absolutely, impossibly silent. And slowly, one by one, the ancient lights that had fled from Lyrae, her entire life began to bow toward the human who knelt beside her. Lyrae could not breathe, could not think, could only stare as the impossible unfolded before her. The godlights circled Elias like he was the center of gravity itself, their light shifting through colors she had never seen them display. He was not commanding them, he was not controlling them, he was simply there, his hands still on her shoulders, his expression confused but gentle. "Please," he said softly, and the godlights drew closer as if listening. "Please don't hurt her. She's scared, and that's okay, but please don't hurt her." One of the lights, the largest, descended until it hovered at eye level with him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then it pulsed once, twice, and drifted toward Lyrae. She flinched. She could not help it. 20 years of rejection had trained her well. But the godlight did not flee. It did not recoil. It touched her cheek with a warmth that felt like forgiveness, like acceptance, like everything she had been denied since childhood. Her gift, that wild, uncontrolled thing inside her, gentled. The energy that had always felt like drowning suddenly felt like breathing. Not controlled, not suppressed, but balanced. For the first time in her life, Lyra's gift was stable. She broke. Tears came hot and fast. Years of shame and isolation pouring out in great, shaking sobs. Elias did not speak, did not offer platitudes. He simply shifted, pulling her into an embrace that felt like the safest place in the galaxy. "You didn't save me," she managed between sobs. "You showed me I never needed saving." "I didn't do anything," Elias said, sounding genuinely baffled. "I just asked them to be nice." "That is what you do not understand. No one has ever asked them to be kind to me. No one has ever stood beside me when I was breaking. You did both." The Godlights continued their dance around them, and Lyra realized something profound. They were not bowing to Elias's power. He had none. They were responding to his compassion, to the simple, radical act of refusing to let someone suffer alone. In the archway high above, unnoticed by either of them, an elderly Etheriana in reformist robes stood frozen in shock. Elder Thai had come to stop this desecration, to prevent the unworthy from profaning the sacred. Instead, he was witnessing something that should not be possible. Something that contradicted every hierarchy, every rule, every assumption Etherian society was built upon. A human with no gift, no training, no bloodline, was being acknowledged by the Godlights in a way that most Etherianas never achieved in a lifetime of devotion. Below, Elias helped Lyra to her feet. She was steady now, her eyes a clear, calm silver. The small godlight that had followed Elias from his station drifted close, and as they watched, it merged with the larger lights surrounding them, sharing something, communicating in ways beyond language. "We need to leave," Lyra said quietly. "If we are found here—" The alarm shattered the moment. Ancient and piercing, it echoed through the temple like a scream. The Godlights scattered, not fleeing but taking defensive positions. Lyra's hand found Elias's, gripping tight. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. They will punish you for my failures." "Hey," Elias said, squeezing her hand. "We knew this was a possibility. No regrets, remember." The sound of armored feet on crystal grew louder. Shadows appeared in the doorways, guardians in ceremonial armor that was nevertheless very functional. Their weapons were not drawn, but the threat was clear. The lead guardian, a stern Etheriana with rank markings Lyra recognized, stepped forward. His voice was cold, absolute. "You have profaned the forbidden temple. You have broken laws that have stood for millennia. Both of you will face judgment." Lyra stepped in front of Elias instinctively, protectively. "The fault is mine. He only followed because I asked." "Nope," Elias said, stepping up beside her. "I followed because I wanted to. Full agency, full responsibility." The Guardian's expression did not change. "Take them both." As rough hands seized them, separating them, pulling them toward different exits, Lyra saw Elias's face. He looked afraid finally, but he also looked certain. Their eyes met across the growing distance, and he smiled, a smile that said it was worth it. The Hall of Judgment was designed to make the accused feel small. Lyra had seen it once before, from the visitors' gallery, when another unworthy had been sentenced for attempting to handle a sacred artifact. She had never imagined standing here, in the center of the circular floor with the Council of Elders arrayed above like stars in a condemning sky. Elias was somewhere else, held separately. She could not see him, could not know if he was afraid or hurt or already being sent away. The not knowing was worse than any sentence they could pass on her. Elder Koresh, the Orthodox leader, spoke first. His voice carried the weight of tradition, heavy and unmovable as stone. "Lyra of the House Vayan, you are accused of entering the Forbidden Temple while bearing the mark of unworthiness. You are accused of bringing an outsider into sacred space. You are accused of disrupting the natural order. How do you answer?" She wanted to be brave. She wanted to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. trapped by years of being told she had no right to speak on matters of the sacred. She began. She has no defense, another elder interrupted. The unworthy cannot justify profanation. Then let me speak. Elias's voice rang clear across the hall. He was being brought in through a side entrance, 2 guardians gripping his arms, but his chin was up and his gaze was steady. They forced him to his knees beside Lyrae, but even kneeling he radiated a quiet defiance that made her chest tight. "You have no voice here, human," Elder Koresh said coldly. "You are not part of our hierarchy. You are not even part of our world." "And yet the Godlights listened to me," Elias said simply. The hall went deadly silent. "That was an error," Koresh stated flatly. "An anomaly. The temple itself malfunctioned. Godlights respond to bloodline, to worthiness, to the sacred hierarchy that has governed Etherian since the first dawn. They do not respond to humans." "Then explain what I saw." Elder Thay stood from his seat among the reformists, his aged voice shaking. "I was there. I witnessed it. The Godlights did not malfunction. They chose. You speak heresy, Thay. I speak truth." The human asked them to help her. They listened. Her gift stabilized for the first time in her life. "How do you explain this by hierarchy?" "The hierarchy is absolute," Koresh said, but there was something brittle in his voice now. "Humans have no spiritual resonance. This is known." "Is it?" Elias asked quietly. "Because from where I'm kneeling it seems like maybe the hierarchy missed something. I dare to say that I didn't ask for power. I didn't claim any authority. I just asked them not to hurt her." Elias's voice was steady, calm, like he was explaining something obvious. "That's it. That's all I did." As if to punctuate his words, the crystal pillars of the judgment hall began to glow. Faintly at first, then brighter, responding to something, to someone. The elders shifted uneasily as the light grew, as the very structure of their court began to resonate. "Stop this," Koresh demanded, but he was not looking at Elias. He was looking at the crystals, which were now humming with a frequency that made the air vibrate. "I'm not doing anything," Elias said truthfully. Lyrae understood before anyone else. The hall was responding to emotion, to truth, to the same thing the Godlights had responded to in the temple. Not power, not bloodline, but authenticity. She found her voice, finally. Found it in anger, in love, in the refusal to be silent anymore. "The hierarchy failed," she said, her words cutting through the chaos. "It failed me. It failed every Etheriana born with gifts that don't fit your perfect molds. This human gave me what none of you ever did. Balance, acceptance, the belief that I was enough. You are not fit to speak of. I am fit to speak of my own life." Her silver eyes blazed violet, her gift rising not in chaos, but in purpose. "He showed me that the problem was never my gift. It was your shame, your rigid definitions of worth, your fear of anything that challenges your perfect order." The hall's resonance reached a peak. Hairline cracks appeared in one of the pillars. "This stops now," Elder Koresh said, his voice shaking. "The human will be exiled. The girl will be contained for her own safety and ours. This is the judgment of the council." "No," said a voice from the gallery, then another, then a dozen more. Guardians, observers, even some of the lower-ranked elders. The dissent rippled through the hall like a wave, but it did not matter. The orthodox majority held power, and they had made their decision. Lyrae reached for Elias's hand one last time, as they were pulled apart, memorizing the warmth of his fingers, the certainty in his eyes. "I don't regret it," he called as they dragged him toward the exit. "Neither do I," she called back, and meant it with her entire soul. They called it containment, but Lyrae knew a prison when she saw one. The room was small, crystalline, designed to dampen any gift that might try to manifest. She sat on the floor, her back against the wall, and let herself break in a way she had not allowed since childhood. 3 corridors away, she knew Elias was being escorted to a transport ship. Exile. Permanent separation from Etherian, from his research, from her. All because he had chosen kindness over protocol. The weight of it crushed her. Not the imprisonment, not even the shame, but the knowledge that someone had finally seen her as whole, as worthy, and she had brought destruction down on him for it. "I should have stayed alone," she whispered to the empty room. "I should have known better." The door opened. Elder Thay entered, his expression worn with something like grief. He carried no weapons, no restraints, only a data pad that he set aside immediately. "You were never the problem," he said without preamble. "The system is." Lyrae laughed, bitter and sharp. "Your system is exiling the first person who ever treated me like I mattered. Forgive me if I don't care about its problems right now. I'm trying to help. Then let me go. Let me at least say goodbye." Thay shook his head slowly. "I cannot override the council, but I can tell you what I found in the archives. There was a prophecy, millennia old, speaking of one without lineage who would calm the light. We dismissed it as metaphor. We were wrong. I don't care about prophecies. I care about Elias. He cared about you enough to face our entire hierarchy. That kind of courage is rare. And it's being punished," Lyrae said, her voice breaking. "He showed me that existing doesn't require permission, that being afraid doesn't make me weak. And now he's being erased for it." Thay was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that changed nothing and everything. "The Godlights are dimming. Across the planet. They started dying the moment he was sentenced. 4 levels up. In the transport bay, Elias sat alone on a bench designed for beings larger than him. The guards had left him unrestrained, either out of pity or the certainty that he could not escape. He pulled out the paper letter he had written, the one he said he would never send, and added a final line. "I mattered to someone. That's more than I hoped for. No regrets." He folded it carefully and tucked it back in his pocket. His hands were shaking, but his resolve was not. Given the choice again, he would make the same decision. Lyrae deserved someone who stood beside her. If that cost him everything, then it cost him everything. The small godlight that had followed him from his station drifted through the wall like it was made of air. It hovered in front of him, pulsing in distress, its light flickering in a way that looked dangerously like dying. "Hey, little one," Elias said softly. "I'm okay." "Well, I'm not, but I will be. You should go back to the others." The godlight pulsed again, more insistent. Then it shot upward, through the ceiling, gone. In the containment room, Lyrae felt it the moment the change began. The walls that had been dampening her gift suddenly felt less solid. The energy in the air shifted, thinned, as if something vital was being withdrawn. "What's happening?" she asked Thay. The elder checked his data pad, his expression shifting to alarm. "The godlights throughout the citadel. They're going dark, not fleeing, dying." "Why?" "I don't know. This has never happened before." But Lyrae knew. She felt it in her bones. In her gift that was somehow more stable even now than it had ever been before. The godlights were not dying. They were refusing to shine for a system that punished compassion, refusing to serve a hierarchy that valued bloodline over connection, refusing to witness an injustice and stay silent. In the transport bay, alarms began to sound. The ship's engines, which ran on channeled godlight energy, sputtered and died. Emergency lights flickered on, dim and red. Throughout the citadel, throughout Etherian itself, the lights that had burned since the first dawn began to go out. And in the council chambers, where the Orthodox elders were arguing about protocol, Elder Koresh looked up at the darkening crystals and whispered the most terrifying words any Aetheriana could utter. "The lights are dying. What have we done?" The emergency council session was chaos. Elders shouted over each other as reports flooded in. Power grids failing, temple lights dimming, godlights across 3 continents going dark. Etherion, a civilization built on light, was facing its first true darkness in recorded history. Elder Thay stood at the center of the storm, his reformist robes somehow commanding attention despite his lack of volume. "They are responding to emotion, not hierarchy," he said for the 3rd time, his patience wearing thin. "The research is clear. Godlights have always resonated more strongly with children, with artists, with those you label as imperfect. They respond to genuine feeling, not bloodline purity." "Heresy?" spat Elder Koresh, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. Around them, the council chamber's own lights were flickering like dying stars. Call it heresy if you want, but ask yourselves why the lights began failing the moment we sentenced a human for showing compassion. They pulled up data on the chamber's display. Every stabilization, every moment of true resonance in the past century came from moments of emotional authenticity. The hierarchy you so prize has been suppressing the very thing the Godlights respond to. "What are you proposing?" asked an elder from the moderate faction, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. "Bring them back, the human and the girl. Release them both. Let the Godlights choose." "You would have us bow to the demands of sacred energy?" Koresh demanded. "I would have us listen to what they have been trying to tell us for millennia." In her containment cell, Lyrae had stopped crying. The fear had burned through, leaving something harder in its place. She stood, pressing her hands against the dampening walls, and felt her gift pulse stronger than it ever had before. Ilias had given her something permanent, not control in the traditional sense, but acceptance, the understanding that her gift's instability was not a flaw, but a reflection of her emotional honesty in a society that prized rigid composure. She was done apologizing for existing. "Elder Thay," she called, her voice carrying a certainty that made him turn. "I don't need your permission anymore, and neither does Elias. We showed you something true, and you tried to bury it. That's on you." Thay smiled, sad but proud. "The guards have already been instructed to release you. If you choose to stay, to fight for change from within, I will stand with you. And if I choose to leave, then I will understand, but I think you want to fight. You've been fighting your whole life. Now you finally have allies." In the transport bay, the ship carrying Elias sat dead in its dock. The pilot had given up trying to restart it. The guards stood around awkwardly, unsure if they were supposed to prevent escape from a vessel that could not move. Then the small godlight returned, not alone, but leading a stream of others. They poured through the bay like a river of light, bypassing guards and protocols and every law that said they should not obey a human. They swarmed the transport, not attacking, but insisting, pulling at the hull with threads of pure energy. The ship's doors opened, not by command, but by the will of sacred light that refused to be complicit in exile. Elias stepped out, his expression caught between awe and confusion, and found himself surrounded by godlights that had apparently decided he was their problem now. "Okay," he said to them, to the universe, to no one. "I guess we're doing this." The Guardians, to their credit, did not try to stop him. They could not have if they tried. The Godlights formed a corridor of light, leading him not toward escape, but toward the council chambers, toward Lyrae. When the massive doors opened, and Elias walked through flanked by Godlights like an honor guard he had never asked for, the council chamber fell absolutely silent. Lyrae stood in the visitors' gallery, her eyes wide, her gift blazing stable and bright around her like a crown. Their eyes met across the chamber, and she felt everything she had been holding collapse into a single, perfect moment of certainty. He had come back. Through guards and laws and the impossible force of sacred energy itself, he had come back. The godlights in the chamber, those that had not yet gone dark, suddenly blazed to full brightness. The crystals sang. The very air shimmered with possibility. Elder Koresh stood, his face pale, but his voice still holding authority. "This changes nothing. The law is clear." "Then, perhaps," Aaliyah said quietly, walking down the chamber's central aisle as if he belonged there, "it's time for new law." Every godlight in the chamber pulsed once, in perfect agreement. The Orthodox elders demanded proof. They always did. Tradition was a shield they had wielded so long, it had become part of their identity. If they were wrong about the hierarchy, about worthiness, about the fundamental structure of their society, then what were they? "You claim the Godlights respond to the human," Elder Koresh said, his voice strained but still commanding. "Then let the unworthy one prove she can control her gift. Now, before the council, if she fails, you both accept permanent exile, no second chances." It was a trap. Lyrae knew it immediately. They wanted her to fail publicly, spectacularly, to prove that emotion was chaos and hierarchy was necessary. They wanted her shame to justify their system. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt calm. "I accept," she said, stepping forward before anyone could object. She walked down to the chamber floor, her silver eyes steady, her chin high. The godlights swirled around her, uncertain, waiting. Elias moved to follow, but she held up a hand. "No, this time I need to do it myself." He stopped, understanding crossing his face. She needed to prove to herself as much as to them that Elias had not fixed her. He had simply shown her she was never broken. The chamber fell silent. Lyrae closed her eyes and reached for her gift, that wild, terrified thing that had defined her as failure since childhood. But this time, she did not try to force it into submission. She did not fight it or fear it or hate it. She accepted it. "The problem was never my gift," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber with perfect clarity. "It was the shame you wrapped it in. You taught me to fear my own power because it didn't look like yours. You called instability a flaw when it was simply honesty." She opened her eyes, and her gift rose around her like a storm, wild and beautiful and completely, perfectly her. The godlights did not flee. They joined her, weaving through her energy in patterns that had never existed before, chaos and order dancing together in something new. The chamber lit up like a star being born. The godlights exploded outward, not in destruction but in celebration, filling every corner, every crack, racing through the citadel and out into the city beyond. Windows blazed, streets illuminated, temples that had gone dark suddenly burned brighter than they had in centuries. Throughout Etherion, people stopped and stared upward as the godlights returned in a wave of pure, unprecedented joy. In the council chamber, Lyrae stood at the center of a maelstrom of light, not controlling it but dancing with it, and for the first time in her life, she was not afraid. Elias, watching from the gallery, felt tears on his face and did not bother to hide them. Then Lyrae did something that made every elder gasp. She turned to Elias and extended her hand. "Your turn." He walked down to her, past guardians who did not stop him, past Orthodox elders who had no words left. He took her hand, and the moment their fingers touched, the godlights went absolutely wild. They wove around both of them, human and Etheriana, worthless and unworthy, and they bowed, not to power, not to bloodline, not to any hierarchy. They bowed to connection, to the radical act of choosing to stand beside someone when the entire world said they should stand apart. Elder Thay was openly crying now, his old hands shaking. "The prophecy," he whispered, "not that he would rule them, that he would be the bridge, that in the end, the one rejected would show us what we had forgotten." The godlights began to show something then, a memory not from the present, but from the deep past. Images formed in the light, scenes of ancient Etherion when it was younger, wilder. Humans walked there, not as visitors but as partners, their emotional openness balancing Etherian order. The civilization had been stronger then, more vibrant, more alive. Then fear, a plague, a war. The humans had left, and in their absence, Etherian had built walls, had created hierarchies, had convinced themselves that rigid control was safety. They had forgotten that strength came from diversity, not uniformity, that the lights responded to life, not rules. The vision faded. The chamber was silent except for the gentle hum of Godlights that no longer fled, no longer dimmed, but simply waited to see what came next. Elder Koresh stood slowly. He looked ancient suddenly, worn down by the weight of being wrong about everything that mattered. "What do you want?" he asked Elias, his voice empty of authority. "The council will grant you any title, any position. You have proven your worth beyond question." Elias looked at Lyrae, then back at the council, and said the most human thing possible. "I don't want anything. I just want her to have the right to exist without fear. That's it. That's all I ever wanted." The lights blazed approval. The chamber sang. And somewhere in the gallery a guardian began to applaud, followed by another, then another, until the sound filled the space like thunder. The reforms came slowly, as meaningful change always does. But they came. The council, restructured with Elder Thay at its head, issued the Edict of Imperfection. It stated simply that variance in gifts was not failure, but potential. That emotional honesty was not weakness, but strength. That the hierarchy had served its purpose and must now evolve. Not everyone agreed. Change never comes without resistance. But the Godlights made their opinion clear, shining brightest for those who had been labeled unworthy, for the artists and the dreamers and the ones whose gifts never fit the mold. Lyrae stood in what had once been a containment facility and was now the first academy of unconventional gifts. 20 children sat in the courtyard, each one marked as defective by the old system. Each one now learning that their differences were not flaws to be fixed, but strengths to be understood. A young boy, no more than 8, stared at his hands as Godlights flickered erratically around him. "I can't make them stop," he whispered, afraid. Lyrae knelt beside him. "You're not supposed to make them stop. You're supposed to feel what you're feeling and let them feel it too. That's not wrong. That's honest." The boy's eyes, amber with stress, shifted to a curious green. The Godlights around him steadied, not into perfect control, but into something better. Authentic resonance. Elias watched from the doorway, a datapad in hand covered in notes for his latest research paper. He had turned down 3 prestigious positions to stay here, to keep documenting what they were learning about the relationship between emotion and energy. The academic community back on Earth thought he was wasting his time on a backwater planet. They had no idea what he had found. Lyrae finished with the child and crossed to him, her silver eyes warm bronze in the afternoon light. "You're smiling," she observed. "You're teaching," he replied. "It suits you." They walked together through the academy grounds, which had once been a place of shame and was now a place of hope. Guardians who had once enforced isolation now protected those who had been isolated. Orthodox elders who had lost their power in the reforms had mostly chosen quiet retirement over active resistance. Some things could not be forced, only invited. They found themselves at the temple, which was no longer forbidden. The doors stood open now, welcoming any who approached with respect rather than fear. The statues no longer judged. The Godlights no longer tested bloodline. Lyrae and Elias sat on the steps where so much had changed, their hands finding each other naturally, comfortably. The small Godlight that had started everything drifted nearby, content. "The council asked me again about a title," Elias said after a while. "Mediator, bridge-bearer. They have 6 different options." "What did you say?" "I said, I'm a researcher who got lucky enough to meet someone worth knowing." He looked at her, his expression soft. "The Godlights bowed to your voice. They bowed to connection," Lyrae corrected gently. "To the choice we made to stand together when everything said we should stand apart." "So what do we do now?" She leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the godlights dance across the evening sky. We keep standing together. We keep teaching that broken is just another way of being whole. We keep showing them that the most radical thing in the universe is choosing to care when caring costs everything. That's a lot of work. Yes, worth it, always. Years would pass. The academy would grow. Human researchers would begin arriving, drawn by papers describing an energy source that responded to emotion rather than mechanics. Young Etherianas would grow up in a world where their feelings were not shameful, where imperfection was not exile. The prophecy, once dismissed, would be studied not as prediction, but as reminder. The rejected shall be the bridge, not through conquest, not through force, but through the stubborn, unreasonable, absolutely human refusal to accept that anyone deserves to suffer alone. But that was the future. This was now. Now was Elias pulling out a worn piece of paper, the letter he had written in his darkest moment. Now was him adding one more line. I mattered to someone, and she mattered to me, and together we mattered enough to change a world. Now was Leary taking the letter and carefully pressing it flat, preserving it, knowing that someday a student would ask how it all began. Now was the Godlights humming their approval as the two of them sat together, neither one fixed, neither one perfect, both of them exactly enough. The temple glowed softly behind them, and if the light seemed to pulse in a rhythm that suggested satisfaction, well, energy always did no more than it let on. In a universe built on hierarchies, on the careful sorting of worth and the rigid maintenance of order, two people who should never have mattered discovered something the galaxy had forgotten. The greatest force is not power, it is presence. The choice to sit beside someone and say, without conditions, without requirements, without shame, I am here. You are enough. We are real. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, the light itself agrees. In the end, Evan and Sailira didn't prove that love conquers all. They proved something far less tidy and far more human, that choosing to stay even when you're terrified can alter the trajectory of an entire world. Humanity's miracle was never technology or courage. It was the absurd willingness to hold someone else's storm as if it were your own. So now the question turns to you. If someone handed you a storm, not metaphorically, but the real dangerous glowing kind, would you step closer or step away? What part of yourself have you been suppressing because someone once convinced you it was too much? And maybe the most uncomfortable one, who could you become if someone simply stayed by your side instead of running? If you made it here, write anchor in the comments so we know you danced with us until the final beat. Tell us your city. We love watching this universe connect across real skies. And if the story stirred something in you, subscribe, like, hype it in the comments, share it with someone who might need a reminder that storms aren't always meant to be feared. And when the screen shows the next video card, follow it. The story continues, and so do we.